Need a wider lens. Idea. Let's check it out, Bubba. See what we got. Yeah, we're gonna see if we can get it. $16.99. Should we get it? Yeah? Okay. Is it here already? Let's go. Come on. Let's go. Yes. What? Keys. Yes, I got it.
Where's Z?
The 17-28 by Tamron. I am going to do image quality, video autofocus test, a full in-depth review of this lens. Shall we get into it? Let's get into it. What's going on, guys? My name's Jason Morris. Today we're going to be talking about the Tamron 17-28mm f2.8 for Sony E-mounts. Now, that was a little bit of a long intro, but I just wanted to spice things up a little bit and test out this lens that we're using right now for that intro. Now, I did film pretty much a lot of it on the Tamron 28-75, which was my predominant lens that I used on my Sony A7 III. And now I just purchased the 17-28 f2.8, which is pretty much the partner of that, or the little brother, little sister, whatever you want to call it. And I just wanted to fill in that wide angle range because 28mm wasn't necessarily wide enough, especially for landscapes. I did a lot of landscapes when I was in Tasmania. Couldn't get wide enough, and the 17mm to 28 would have been absolutely perfect for that travel. Now I want to dive into video autofocus tests, the image quality, distortion, and all those kind of things later on in this video. The timestamps will be below if you guys want to skip to that, but to help out my channel, watch as much as you can. That would be much appreciated. Also, I am at 7,000 subs, and I really appreciate you guys for subscribing to my channel and watching my content. So let's just dive into some of the specs so we can see exactly what this thing has. The RXD Rapid Extra Silent Stepping Drive autofocus motor delivers impressively quiet, quick, smooth focusing performance to suit stills and video applications. It has a bright 2.8 maximum aperture and a minimum aperture of f22. So the versatile wide angle zoom is designed for the full frame Sony E-mount mirrorless cameras. However, it can be used with APS-C models where it would provide a 25.5 to 42mm equivalent focal length range. All right, so let's dive into the image quality test so we can see some distortion and how sharp it is throughout the full focal length. So first of all, I just got to let you guys know that there wasn't a distortion correction button in Lightroom because it is a very new lens and they need to update the software for the lens to be in there. So you can't correct any of the distortion. Now, first of all, we start at f2.8 at 17mm. In the center, it is relatively sharp at 17mm at f2.8. We go out to the outsides, and it's a little bit soft on the corners, which is expected at the 2.8 aperture. Stopping it down to f4 into the center, and it is nice and sharp, and it has a little bit better contrast. Moving out to the corners, and the corners seem to be getting a little bit sharper with more contrast. Now stopping it down to f5.6, you can still see there is a little bit of barrel distortion coming into the center, and it is tack sharp. It's really good contrast. Moving out to the edges, and the edges have sharpened up a lot with high contrast. Now stopping it down to f8, There still seems to be obviously barrel distortion coming into the center, and it is incredibly sharp, high contrast, and the corners are exactly the same, nice and sharp. Now we stop it down to f/22, and in the center, it doesn't actually seem to have too much lens diffraction. The contrast seems to be quite good. The sharpness is quite good as well. Moving out to the corners, it is a little bit soft, but it's still relatively sharp and high contrast, which is great for the minimum aperture of 22. Now changing the lens to 28mm, and you can see there's very slight pin cushioning with that distortion. In a center, it is quite sharp at 2.8, coming out to the sides, and it is still a little bit soft out to the sides. Contrast is good though. Stopping it down to f4, still the pin cushioning coming into the center. Sharpness is very, very sharp at f4, going out to the corners, and it obviously got a little bit sharper, which is great. Now at f5.6, still pin cushioning, going into the center, nice and tack sharp, high contrast, fantastic image right there out to the corners, and it seems to be reached its peak sharpness in the corners, so that is very good. At f8, pin cushioning still visible, going into the center, absolutely tack sharp, which is expected at f8, and out to the corners, same again, it is tack sharp at f8. And down to f22, which is the minimum aperture, and you can see it is still very tack sharp, doesn't have too much lens diffraction, which is really, really good, especially if you do shoot landscapes. Out to the corners, and it is quite sharp in the corners as well. Overall, really great performance from this lens. So let's throw up a few photos and show you exactly what kind of focal lengths you can get. So let's compare it from 17mm all the way up to 28mm. All right, I'll show you some photos. So that is the image quality test. Now let's jump into the autofocus test to see how fast this thing can focus. So we jump into the autofocus test. Now obviously autofocus is dependent on the speed of your camera as well as the lens. Now just jumping in and out of frame, you can see the focusing is very accurate and is quite fast. Now I did high key this setup so it could focus obviously a lot easier, and it's very accurate. The focus speed is very fast at 17mm. Now we go to 28mm, and it seems to be focusing just as fast as it would as a native lens. This is fantastic when it jumps in and out. You can see it, oh yeah, Bubba's getting a little bit pissed off with me, so I better stop doing that. But you can see it tracks the subject quite well. Now, firstly, I want to go through a little bit of pros and cons with this. Now, the range, 17 to 28mm. Now, it does cover that nice wide angle range through from 17 to 28mm, especially if you are paired with the 28 to 75. You're pretty much covered from 17 all the way to 75. Then you've got your crop sensor mode on your full frame mirrorless camera if you're shooting with the A7 range. Which makes it obviously a much more versatile. So you times it by 1.5 and you get much more range with that. Obviously with photos, you get a little bit of quality loss. With video, only a little bit, barely noticeable, which is fantastic. Now, generally with most wide angle lenses, especially the 16 to 35, they have an f4, or the Gmaster is an f2.8, but that is ridiculous amounts of money. This is much, much cheaper for pretty much the same lens. I will go into a little bit more comparing that, but the constant f2.8 aperture is really good for low light situations. In terms of bokeh, you obviously don't necessarily see much bokeh because it is such a wide angle. The closer you are to your subject and the longer focal length will give you much more bokeh. But if you are quite close to your subject, let's go my hand, focuses on my hand, you can see there is quite a lot of bokeh there because I am quite close to the lens, so yeah. So another one of the pros is internal zooming. Now, it doesn't extend past the barrel, which is fantastic. My 28 to 75 extends past the barrel. Now, this can pose an issue with when you are on a fly cam or a steady cam. It's gonna throw the balance out. That sucks for those guys who do use fly cams or steady cams. But if you are on a gimbal, it doesn't make too much of a difference. It just makes the motors work a little bit harder, which is not great in the long run because, you know, it does chew up a little bit more battery. But with this one, it zooms internally, which is fantastic for fly cam and steady cam users. Obviously for gimbals, it's gonna make the motors work a lot less, give you more battery time, which is a plus. So yes, there are some cons of this lens. And now the first con is pretty much the focal length. Yes, it is a 17 to 28, but the Gmaster offers you 16 to 35. So you go a millimeter wider, doesn't make too much of a difference, but you go up to 35. This stops at 28. I do feel like I could do with a little bit more zoom range. You're only focusing, it's not even twice the widest focal range. So from 17, I wish it could go up to say 34 or 35. That would be a lot better. But yeah, that's just one of the cons. I do feel like personally, I could go with a little bit more focal range other than, you know, having to take it off and then switch to my 28 to 75. Now, who is this thing for? Now, this is for pretty much photographers. I know photographers will love this for landscapes, architecture, and creative shots. Now, it gives you such a wide angle that you can capture so much landscape in your shots, which is really cool. And obviously having a fast aperture is really handy for low light situations. And obviously having a sharp lens is really good for landscapes, architecture, creative shots, whatever. Having a sharp lens is just good all round. Now, this can also be used for vloggers. Vloggers will find this very useful because the autofocus is very responsive. You have a very fast aperture and you have a really wide angled lens, so you can capture not just your face, but more of the background. If you have say the Tamron 28 to 75, when you are at 28 millimeters, this is 28 millimeters. My hand is fully extended, holding onto the handle right now. You can barely see anything in the background. Zoom it out to these 17 millimeters and boom, you're seeing so much more, which is fantastic for vloggers. I'm not much of a vlogger myself, but having the 17 to 28 gives me that option that I can start vlogging and get more in my frame, make it look much better. But vlogging is pretty much about the story anyway, not about the lens that you have. Just having those tools does make it a lot easier and to frame up your shots. I know Sonys aren't really good for vlogging because you don't have that flip screen in the full frame range. But if you have a wide angle lens like this, you point that lens directly at your face, you're gonna be in frame anyway, so you don't have to worry about a flip screen as much anyway. It's only if you do talking head shots and you put the camera down, it'd be great if you could see yourself in frame. You need an external monitor. I've got my small HD up there. But like I said, with such a wide angle lens, all you need to do is be in front of the lens and you're going to be in frame, which is fantastic about having such a wide lens. So that is the video about the 17 to 28, guys. I'll be making another video on this just to show you what you can do with this lens. I absolutely love it for the sharpness, for the video autofocus, speeds, the low light capabilities, the price. There are so many pros with this lens. I absolutely love it. I couldn't recommend it anymore. I do wish it was a little bit different. 14 to 28, that would be a lot better. Twice that focal length from the widest focal length. But you know, it is what it is, and it's a fantastic lens for the price. Obviously comparable to that Gmaster lens, but obviously a cheaper price. Yeah, so guys, please hit that like button if you could. That would be absolutely amazing. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you already haven't. There will be much more content coming for you guys in the future with full frame range. APS-C, I'm still sticking in there. Obviously DJI, I love you guys. Hit that bell notification so you can be notified when my next videos come out. Guys, my name's Jason Morris, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, let's get it.
Bye.